What's up YouTube and welcome to an interesting take on Cerebro 2. This deck was a surprise performer at the big Framebreak Tournament last weekend. This video is also gonna be a little bit different than usual because I was one of the commentators for that tournament. So the gameplay footage later on is gonna be some high quality live tournament gameplay with the commentary of me and my dear friend Specimen. And this Cerebro deck allowed for a super interesting series, but before we jump into the action, I just want to give a quick overview and guide of the ideas behind this deck. The core idea, of course, is to have a bunch of 2 power cards across all 3 locations so that Cerebro can buff them all at the same time. Ideally, you copy the Cerebro effect with Mystique and you can boost your power even further across all 3 locations with Blue Marvel, effectively turning you into a Cerebro 3 player instead of a Cerebro 2 player. The rest is just cheap, explosive and useful 2 power cards. Iceman and Cork allow for some great disruption, and Storm, of course, is an unbelievably strong location control tool. Also takes care of locations that we don't like to see. Either stuff like Necrosha that would debuff our cards, or stuff like Nidavellir that would buff our cards and also break the Cerebro synergy. Storm can be followed up very nicely with Brood or Mr. Sinister to get a burst of power all of a sudden, and we can later on buff our power at the flooded location further with Mr. Fantastic and of course with Cerebro buffs and Blue Marvel buffs. Another great control tool is Goose. This will annoy Galactus players to no end. But Goose is also great in a lot of other matchups, and since we can play almost all of our cards behind Goose, it barely handicaps us. The cute idea behind this build specifically is including Lockjaw as well as M'Baku. Lockjaw allows us to fish for more Cerebros, for Broods, or whatever we currently need at the end of the game that is still in deck. We can just shuffle in our low-cost units here that still activate their effect, like Iceman or Cork, or on the very final turn we can shuffle M'Baku in our deck, therefore guaranteeing that he's gonna hop back out for an additional power burst at one of the locations. This deck was built and piloted by Zuff, and I think he's gonna showcase that in the hands of the right players, this deck has enormous potential. But I don't want to keep you waiting any further. Here is the live tournament action.
Because you're just picking blind, it's almost like a bit of a coin toss, right? About who is going to get the prediction right. We didn't quite get the chance to talk too much about the other decks here, but as we can see, we have got a matchup of Patriot versus Patriot.
No, this is exciting. I was glancing over at Zuff's second deck list, and it is actually Cerebro.
Oh, it's Cerebro! Of course.
And
let's go.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this one play out. Eduism can copy the Cerebro and the Mystique here with the Super Scribe, but it doesn't do much for Patriot. Zuff actually sniping a good, or at least an interesting matchup. It's going to be very interesting to see how this one pans out, because Goose can shut down Ultron super duper well. And everyone knows that Specimen loves himself some Goose.
Goose, one of my favorite cards in the game. A card that the later you play it, the better it does become, because you just know where your opponent is looking to play their cards, and like a Goose on turn 5 can be absolutely devastating when combined with a 3-cost card, something like Brood. We are seeing the early snaps. This is a sign of a high-quality matchup that we're about to watch with the snap and the retreat Lobster on the very first game. This is what it's like at the very top level of gameplay.
Often, and unfortunately it's not always the most exciting to watch, but it just highlights the risk management that these top-tier players have. The risk to reward ratio has to be right for them to stay into these games, and we see our second game start right away. This time Zuff has a bit of a weaker opening hand. Eduism has a very top-heavy curve, basically. The Wasp just being way too cheap, and all of the expensive cards being there instead. Going with the emote, the Deadpool emote, that's a lovely one.
Yeah, I'm always a big fan, Lobster, of players that emote during their games. We see the Iceman and the Korg, not a bad start that at all from Zuff. And I love this decision to bring Cerebro 2. Cerebro 2 has always been my favorite Cerebro deck. We've actually seen the option maybe to play Cerebro 3 now with the introduction of Jeff. But sticking with Cerebro 2, the big advantage of this one is you get to play the Storm and the Goose, locking down 2 locations, and then buffing up a lot of your cards later on with cards like Cerebro, Mystique, and the Blue Marvel as well.
And I think it's a good call with the location control that this deck can provide, with Storm and Goose being here, and that does counter quite a few strong decks in the current ladder meta at least. Sandman doesn't love to see those 2 cards, and Galactus would also hate it. We didn't see a Galactus deck in this tournament yet, but even against Patriot, both of them can do wonders.
Yeah, Cerebro's really gone out of fashion in the recent months, and Red Skull Shuri's been insanely popular, and also Thanos of the Soul Stone just completely shutting down Cerebro. One thing you're going to have to look out for is the locations as well. If you see locations which are adding points to Zuff's deck, that is going to really, like a Monster Island, can really disrupt his game plan, but Storm can also help out there. We've seen the Collapse Mine come through. One player decided to skip, the other not. And the Debris also coming through, adding a little bit of board clog to the board.
Oh, and we see the spicy M'Baku tag on Zuff's side. That's not what you see too often in Cerebro. Does make sense, though, as a tag choice. Eduism here with all of the top end in hand. The interesting synergy here almost is Debris and Collapsed Mine are both in play. So that Eduism can choose to destroy all rocks on his own side whenever he wants to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Dream Dimension is going to be quite a big problem here, actually, because Edgeridson would love to go for the Blue Marvel on turn number 5, the Onslaught on 6, but then the Storm comes through on Dream Dimension. Ooh. So this is good in one sense, because this is going to completely lock Eduism out of the turn 6 play. Because his board is full, he could potentially skip this turn because of Collapse Mine, but he's going to have to go for the Blue Marvel, locking him out of turn 6. So Storm working almost in reverse. It's a bit of board clog.
Absolutely. I think Eduism is contemplating here. This play is not locked in, being very aware that it would cost the turn 6. The snap comes through. I think this one was on Eduism's side, seeming very confident here. And I'm not quite sure if I can agree with this because of him being locked out of turn 6 and not having that huge of an advantage on the two side locations. Yeah,
the Blue Marvel is, of course, an insane amount of stats, buffing up every card on the board by 1, not including itself. But, of course, if you really look at the Collapse Mine, there's not that many points going to be there, only 4 points. The Flooded Lane doesn't have that many either, so the Mr. Fantastic is going to be, and the Cerebro, are ways of putting extra points into this flood location on turn 6.
We do see the retreat coming out from Eduism. I do think this is a very wise choice. I did see the snap then. Right. It was a snap coming from Zuff's side. And that, of course, makes perfect choice as soon as you realize you put your opponent in a pincer there, a pincer rather, with the Storm play and shutting them out of the last turn potentially.
Yeah, the Iceman on turn 1 again. No Wasp to hit this time. We saw the Iceman hit the Wasp on the previous 2 turns. Of course, an amazing card in how powerful it is, but one disadvantage or downside, I should say, of the Iceman is you, as the player, do not see what it hits from your opponent's end.
Absolutely, and in this case, it is absolutely crucial because the Patriot Mystique combo cannot come out on turn 6 anymore. So Eduism is going to have to flip his cards and show his strength fairly early on in this one. Does decide to go for the Debris instead of the Patriot Mystique line of play, while Zuff does have a pretty good hand of his own. Blue Marvel into Mystique is a potential line of play. Very interesting Cerebralist though overall, with the Lockjaw tag in as well.
Yeah, super spicy, and that makes the M'Baku a lot better as well, because M'Baku into Lockjaw on turn number 6 is going to give you basically a free card, and then the M'Baku is going to fly out. And of course with Blue Marvel, but moreover the Patriot Mystique, that can be a very big M'Baku. And we do see the change of mind for Eduism, using the rope, deciding in fact to change his mind and go for the Patriot, and then the Mystique on 4 most likely, which I definitely think seems like the optimal play, with the Iceman making things awkward. Storm locking down the flooded location.
And interestingly enough, Zuff blitzed out a Lockjaw Cork combo here and not going for the Brute follow-up behind the Storm, probably thinking that the Brute would be an over-investment and just completely overkill the location, and rather saving that resource for later on. Might pay off very much down the line of this game in the later turns. We did see a snap come in, and both players contemplating and strategizing here. Eduism taking his time to plan out the next move.
Yeah, Grand Central, the location that's still in play as well on turn 5, that's going to be quite impactful. But of course, Storm really changing up the way games of Marvel Snap feels. One of my favorite cards for that reason, just completely changing the dynamic of a game of Marvel Snap.
Absolutely, and I do very much like the play by Eduism here, kind of saying, okay, the flooded location is a tricky one to win here anyway. I will invest Patriot and Mystique there so that they make my other 2 locations stronger, but then does follow up with a Wasp, somewhat trying to contest the flooded location nonetheless, and the Cork got transformed into a Mr. Sinister. So at this point, Zuff only has 8 power in the flooded location. It is still a bit close and sweaty, but Blue Marvel will put it to 12. Cerebro could give everything another 2 points. So this is deceptively strong. People do not realize how strong the right location currently is for Zuff.
Yep, Zuff going for the Blue Marvel on turn 5 here. This does mean as well, if Mystique is pulled by Grand Central, she will copy Blue Marvel herself. And of course, what he might have done in another situation is maybe try to hold this play until turn 6. A play like Cerebro or Blue Marvel on turn 6, adding big points into a flooded location and winning it by surprise can be huge. We see the Thing come down, as well as Misty Knight. 10 points and 6 points is not too shabby at all. The Grand Central RNG.
Onslaught, but no targets for it. Super Skrull, though, could copy Blue Marvel and Mystique into the Onslaught location. And that is going to be a huge power boost. Ultron being set up instead. Let's see what this is. I'm sure Eduism has been taking his time so far. I'm sure he's going to go through all of the options and see what exactly this is going to be. While Zuff goes for the Brute and Mr. Fantastic line of play. Brute fits perfectly into the middle location here, while Mr. Fantastic gives some nice support on the left side. This is going to be a close one. I can't even do the maths quickly enough.
Yeah, and it's a tough decision because the Ultron, you do want these bodies. You've already got the Patriot and the Mystique down. We're seeing that onslaught into Super Skrull, and it looks so tempting because you're going to be getting 4 Blue Marvels worth, basically.
Exactly.
But you don't have that many bodies on the board compared to your opponent. Also, you might be fearing a play like Cerebro on the last turn. You know Mystique is gone, but Cerebro would be adding 8 points more into the flooded location to the right. Instead, the Ultron is putting a lot of points mid. It's putting a lot of points into Grand Central as well, as each of these bots is worth 5 points.
Eduism locked the Ultron in, and now it comes down to what Zuff decides to do. This is going to be a super duper interesting one. Zuff still seems undecided on how to spread out the power, where to go with the Brute and where to go with the Mr. Fantastic.
Yeah, and it's a 4-cube game as it stands if both players lock this one in.
Zuff goes for the retreats. It did look like a very strong retreat because the Ultron with the Patriot as well as the Mystique would have gotten 5 powered drones everywhere, filling up that Onslaught location. Not really making use of the Onslaught ongoing effect, but that was maybe not even necessary, just overwhelming with pure power.
That was such an exciting game, Lobster. I'm loving the diverse meta we've got here. Obviously, we've had a lot of balance changes in the recent weeks, and it's so exciting to see all of the different decks coming into the meta as a result of that.
Both players with a pretty good start so far. Mystique seems to be absorbing, seems to be magnetic to these Iceman hits.
Yeah, of course, like in this particular hand, it was actually guaranteed it can't hit the Onslaught and Ultron. So this is where Iceman, we see another snap come through as well. A turn 2 snap. These early snaps are very common at the highest level.
And this must have come from Zuff, I'm pretty sure, with the Cerebro in hand, as well as the Storm in hand, as well as a good early curve. I can totally get behind it. I do think this is solid play from Zuff and puts Eduism in an awkward situation, having to stay for more cubes with a very clunky hand.
Yeah, Storm with Morag and the Miniaturizer Lab showing up is quite incredible. This does mean that there is going to be no cards available to play for a couple of turns. So we see the snapback. Suddenly, it's a 4-cube game.
Wasp is incredibly useful here just to enable Eduism to get into Morag with the Brood. And the Brood can get buffed later on to insane power values. Zuff is in a much trickier spot here. I think Eduism realized that Cerebro is always going to be the weak spot here and can really only be played into the middle this turn and next turn, right? Cerebro is going to have to hide in Morag. But you first have to play another cheap card before that, and that's not so easy to do after most of the cheap cards are already out on Zuff's side.
Lots of roping action we're seeing here, and it is gonna be live. We have a 4-cube game, ladies and gentlemen, as the Storm comes down into Warrior Falls. All eyes on the flooded location. If you want to get any stats into Morag, this is the turn to do it, or on turn number 6. Of course, as you mentioned, like Ultron, going to be a way of putting big points into lots of locations on the final turn.
And you love to see it. I think this was very, very astute play by Zuff, realizing that the Cerebro is kind of messed up in the middle and turning that around with the Storm location, allowing him to now deploy the Cerebro behind the flooded location, not being endangered by Warrior's Force anymore. But nonetheless, Zuff is going to have no play. Well, both players are going to have no play on turn 5.
Yep.
This is a very interesting situation, very high-class Marvel Snap game. You love to see it.
And this is just why I love Storm so much. He just really changes the dynamic of so many games. We've got the nullified version of Storm as well. Ratings out of 10 for the nullified Storm variant, Lobster?
This has to be an easy 9 at least. This might even crit for a 17 sometimes. You never know, depending on who you ask. But Eduism is in a really tough spot here. Deciding for the Wasp into Patriot play, I'm a bit surprised here. It feels like this would be a Mystique setup, but Mystique can't be played next turn.
Yep, you can't play Mystique next turn, and then on the final turn, surely Ultron is going to be the only option to just fill the board with stats. So Patriot buffing everything. The Wasp, of course, costs you nothing, so why not play it?
It does make sense, though. In this situation, Ultron is just going to be your final play. I'm just a bit surprised, I'll be honest. I would have expected Patriot mid and Wasp to be saved for the last turn.
Yeah, in fact, you're correct. Like, saving Wasp to the last turn and playing it in the same location as Ultron would surely be optimal, because the Wasp is the same amount of points as a normal Doombot, and you're basically just playing the Wasp where a Doombot would be, so it's doing nothing, whereas in the Ultron lane, it would just be extra points. All right, we're into the final turn. It's a 4-cube game. If both players lock it in, it will be a 7-cube game, which is lethal for Zuff. If Edoism loses, he still lives to fight another day, but it's going to be a huge comeback. Both players have felt confident and snapped. Neither player retreated on their opponent's snap, so surely they cannot back out now.
Absolutely, and I love the player camps for exactly these types of situations. You can literally see the stress in both players' faces. You can see them trying to do the quick maths, trying to get as many thoughts through their heads as possible on this tight timer. Mystique comes out buffing everything on Zuff's side. We did see Edgewism lock in the Ultron, and now the power distribution is going to be absolutely crucial. High numbers on the right side for Zuff. Surely going to take this one. The Ultron bots come down. Middle is going to be a tie. What do the tiebreakers look like? And it does come down to the Patriot being in the left location.
Wow.
That was the difference maker for an 8-cuber in this enormous set. Would the Wasp have been saved to support the right side later on? We would have had a totally different situation, maybe.
Yeah, that is quite a fascinating situation. The Ultron, of course, not in the same location as the Wasp. The Patriot also was kind of competing for value with the Ultron in a lot of ways. And Edoism is living to fight another day, but it looks like Zuff with the Cerebro, the unorthodox pick, is, well, he's in a very, very favorable position, that's for sure, but it's certainly not all over. The situation we're now in, where Edoism has just 2 cubes, essentially means we've got a game with no snaps remaining, because 2 cubes is the minimum amount, but it's also the maximum amount either player can have. So we're going to be seeing all 6 turns of every game for the rest of this series.
It's a very interesting situation. Edgewism basically has to do the hero run and win, what is it, 4 times in a row, I think, to pull off the miracle comeback. There is no more retreating for either of those 2 players. We're going to see some action being played out. And Edgewism, well, this time no Mystique that's absorbing the Iceman hit. Shocker does get rendered somewhat useless here instead. Zuff seems to have a fairly good opening hand, just still missing the Cerebro to buff everything nicely.
Yeah, Crimson Cosmos and Hellfire Club, quite awkward locations as well. But again, no retreating in this one, so you may as well always play out all 6 turns. There's no reason to retreat, essentially.
Edgewism does have a top-end heavy hand here, but both players not having their key engines online. No Cerebro on Zuff's side, no Patriots, no Mystique on Edgewism's side. Onslaught is kind of lonely and empty right now. It's gonna be curious. I'm gonna be curious to see who just wins in this like pure and raw stat check. Of course, Lockjaw does give additional opportunities to find those key cards. That's something that Edgewism doesn't have on his side.
The danger room, denying the debris, sniping it on the 25%. Lockjaw has some very wacky interactions with Danger Room, because your card can die to Danger Room, but it will still get shuffled back into your deck and another card will be pulled. So if you can get that Lockjaw in Danger Room and surviving, you're feeling in a very strong position. So Zuff just needs to win one of the next 4, looking to get it done the first time of asking.
At the same time, Edgewism just managed to pull out the Patriot from the top of the deck, which does, of course, enable the Onslaught, make him useful after all, and does have some big boys, let's say. The Thing, the Shocker, and the Tiny Wasp that can swoop in on turn 6 for 0 cost, also can flip the Crimson Cosmos around quite easily. So we have to assume Edgewism at least is going to be favored in this right location. And the Storm comes down on the left, really limiting Edgewism's playmaking potential.
Yeah, Storm on turn 4 usually not amazing, because you really want to get this girl down sooner, but with a card like Brood and then plays like Mr. Fantastic and Cerebro on turn number 6, not as bad as you might think, and particularly with the Goose as well. This is the Goose on turn 2 that I was talking about potentially, like Brood into the Storm lane, Goose elsewhere could be very, very powerful.
options to go through here for Zuff. Zuff does not really have anything they would like to shuffle into Lockjaw. Most targets here are quite high priority, and they also are kind of forced to follow up into the Storm location, trying to ensure the victory there. Let's see, 2 blue Marvels. No, wait, 1 blue Marvel, 2 blue Marvels come
Danger
out.
room.
25%? Easy dodge, it seems like, and the blue Marvel does stay intact. Now, the constant threat of Ultron has to be something that is going through Zuff's mind right here, though.
Yeah, and Crimson Cosmos is also having a big impact on this one as well, really limiting some of the options players have available. Of course, that Goose is basically already built in, like Crimson Cosmos is stopping you playing the Goose there, and then with the Lockjaw, you can't play Goose there either. So Goose wasn't an option there on turn 5. The Lockjaw RNG could be pretty huge, and Baku is already down on the board, so we're not going to be seeing Baku flying out, unfortunately.
The interesting thing here, and what makes it nice for us as spectators, as viewers, is that there is not going to be a retreat. We will for sure see this RNG play out just because of the cube situation. Mr. Fantastic gets shuffled into the deck. First pull is going to be... drum roll, a Mystique copying the blue Marvel. That is quite solid.
That is a very weird interaction. So the Mr. Fantastic was played, but Mystique was copied. The Patriot comes down. Danger Room, it survives. It's another tiebreaker, but it does go the way of Patriot.
Staying alive here.
Yeah, this interaction a lot of people are going to be quite surprised about because Mr. Fantastic was played, but then Mystique was found off Lockjaw, but instead of copying Mr. Fantastic, it copied Blue Marvel. It's because the Mr. Fantastic was played that exact same turn. The Mystique basically just still copies the card before. It works the same way with Jubilee. If you like Jubilee into Absorbing Man, for example, it won't copy the Jubilee, it will copy the card played the previous turn.
That is correct, because a card does not count as fully played until its effect resolved. And it's the same with Lockjaw. And that's why it's kind of logical the Mystique would copy the previous card. And we are going back into another game where Aduism is fighting for pure survival here. Quantum Realm has to be a location that Zuff is pretty happy about because it does synergize with Cerebro. Cerebro and Mystique can now both get buffed by their own effect.
Any other Cerebro deck would hate to see this, but Cerebro 2 loves to see a little bit of Quantum Realm action. Like playing your Cerebro, your Mystique in there, that is a lot of extra points because not only are you getting the +2 of Quantum Realm, but then they're getting the extra +4 potentially from the Cerebro and Mystique.
However, look at how powerful Aduism's hand here is. Patriot, Mystique, and Ultron all in hand. Alternatively, instead of the Ultron, it could also be an Onslaught coming down, basically having a quadruple Patriot effect spread out across the board if necessary. Debris for some clogging. Both players off to a great start here.
Yeah, the Goose limiting a lot of plays down the middle. You really need to plan ahead when you see this Goose because you want to be getting your cheap cards into that location. Of course, Ultron going to be an option to get points in there as well. With buffed up cards like Patriot and Mystique, those bots can be worth a lot of points.
Aduism contemplating here, of course. Every move is super crucial and literally vital with only 2 cubes left in these high cube games.
Yeah, Aduism looking to pull off the comeback of dreams. If he wins this one, still going to need 2 more, as Zuff is on 5 cubes. This is a situation, Lobster, where we see being on an odd number of cubes actually very valuable. At a very high level, it's something to bear in mind before the high stakes mode kicks in. If you end up on an odd number, you almost have like it's like the same as being being on 7 cubes is basically being on 8 as soon as you're in high stakes, because it's only even numbers of cubes you can win or lose.
Exactly. It sometimes can function as an 11th HP point. As
that's a great way of phrasing it,
Or as 1 extra life and then 1 extra shot at glory. Mystique and Cerebro coming down into Quantum Realm as promised, as prophesized. Blue Marvel can now also come down into Quantum Realm and synergize with the Cerebro. That's something we don't see too often. Blue Marvel can also get the full buff of himself as well as Cerebro as well as Mystique.
The Debris going to come down. Debris on turn 5, a really nice way of trying to lock your opponent out of a location. Synergizes very well with a card like Daredevil in moments like this to see exactly where your opponent's playing. Of course, not an option in this case.
And Aduism is not opting for the rather greedy Patriot into Mystique into Ultron line of play, but does keep this combo intact for turn 6. Now that Mystique miraculously once Matrix dodged the Iceman shooting ice at cards, I guess, we do see the Patriot Mystique and Wasp combo being saved until the very final turn of the play.
But look at the power in the Quantum Realm. This is just not typical to have so many points in Cerebro and Mystique lane. Usually, the big downside of this deck is that, okay, you do well in 2 lanes, but the lane you play your Cerebro and Mystique in is very, very weak.
Yep, absolutely. I also just realized I was talking nonsense about Blue Marvel earlier on. Of course, he buffs our other cards. 2-3 power.
Right.
So playing him not into Quantum Realm is absolutely correct.
Yeah, because he's a different power level to the rest of them, right? But because he doesn't buff himself, he pulls them all up to 3.
Exactly. And Zuff did find the Brood, which is the perfect card to hide behind Goose to fill up that location and just had a huge power boost out of nowhere. The Rock's not necessarily something that Zuff wants to see, would have rather used that board space differently, but we will see some explosive turns here from both players.
Yep, it's all coming down to this turn 6. Again, no player is going to retreat here. There's no point. You play it out. Oh, do we? Do we? Clearly not feeling too confident, but come on, just for the fans, let's play it out. Come on.
Adjuism cannot retreat here. Might as well just play it out. Just deciding on where to put the Wasp does go into the right side at the very last moment. And I think Adjuism did all the math and realizing, already congratulating his opponent. Let's see how this one plays out. Huge power numbers for Cerebro. Very uncommon to see that. The dream popped off and Adjuism did well. 18 and 19 power, but it was not enough. And Zuff is going to be the winner of this featured match, going up to a 3-2 score, so 1 positive point in this open round.
Cerebro 2, absolutely popping off. That looks like a serious, serious deck. Again, the lack of red skulls for Shuri, the lack of those soul stones, they have just been keeping Cerebro out of action for so long, but it's a fan favorite deck and it popped off the M'Baku as well in there. What a spicy list.